Thank you for being here this morning to this event organized by CIPS, the Center for International Policy Studies, and the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs. Today we have a distinguished guest to talk about the UK election, which is coming, its context and prospects for British governance. As you know, this is quite an exciting election that's coming up in the United Kingdom at many levels. It is the first election following this historic coalition of Tories and Liberal Democrats. So no doubt that this will be in part a kind of a referendum on its stay in office. It's also the first election following the referendum in Scotland. It's an election where there's a new player on the right, which is gathering a fair number of votes, if we believe the polls, with UKIP, the Independence Party. So it's a very exciting time. The result will have, obviously, an impact on the United Kingdom, potentially even its role or its place in the EU. So we're very fortunate today to have with us John Davis from King's College in London, who will give a talk on the context of the election. John is the head of the Director of Partnerships at the Policy Institute at King's College London. He started his career actually in banking in the city before turning to the world of academics. He's an historian, is a specialist of British government. He's the author of Prime Ministers and Whitehall, 1960 to 1974, and he's currently working on a book on New Labour. He's also played a key role in in London in bridging the academic community with policymakers. So he's always been at the intersection between public policy making, policy debates, and academic work on British government. Before joining King's College, he spent 18 years at Queen's Mary at the University of London. So without further delay, I will just turn things over to John. I'm asked, so we will make some remarks and then we'll have some time for discussion. Because the event is taped, I'm told that when we move into the question period, you should wait to have the microphone before asking your question, so that it can be recorded properly for those who will view the event afterwards. And so join me in welcoming John to the podium. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for a very warm introduction there. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've known Jim a long time and Anna now. They come every year over to London as part of this is the Centre for Public Management and Policy, O'Dell House, on the study tours, and it's always a real sort of like insight to have very senior public servants come over and just like bouncing the ideas off. It's one of those things that makes you recognise just how similar the systems are, but how far apart they are all at the same time. So I'm going to talk to you this morning about the 2015 election coming up in just 6 weeks' time. I was, if any of you read the Daily Mirror in London, I don't, I was quoted in there as saying it's going to be the tightest election since 1945. And I've been trying that out on all of the old and the bold that I know, and I think it's absolutely true. Anyone says they can call this election, they can't. It is absolutely neck and neck, and if you have a photo finish, and the election was this morning, Labour's nose would just take it. You know, it's incredible. And what I'm going to do in the first portion is to look at why this is such a tight election, and then secondly to look at the very big issues that will face the next government, which flow directly from the election and all of the many fascinating parts. Sorry,
I'll just
please. Somebody's trying to censor me, I think. All right, lovely. Okay, so why is this such a tight election? So what I'm going to do is I'll go through the different parties. I mean, back in 1950, 51, there were 2 elections. I think I'm right in saying that that it was truly a 2-party system where 2 parties received upwards of 90% of all votes. Where we are now, this is a multi-party system, and that is making it very difficult indeed. Very difficult, very interesting too. So the Conservative Party. So we have a coalition, first coalition, technical coalition since the Second World War. There have been informal coalitions in the 1970s, and I think Churchill invited the one Liberal MP into government in the 1950s. But this is the first technical coalition since the Second World War. I think it surprised many by being more robust. It's not come close to collapsing. Not once really. There's been no particular crisis. And it's going to be so wonderful over the next 5 or 10 years to actually put this period into context as we start to look back. I mean, for example, it is entirely likely that the leader of the Liberal Democrats, the Deputy Prime Minister, Nick Clegg, will lose his seat at the next election. If that happens, then that cannot be a more powerful referendum on a leader going into coalition. So he's within 3 points at the moment on the most recent poll of his constituency. But on the whole, it's certainly led to strong, stable government, as our civil service love to put it. And so a lot must go down to the Prime Minister, David Cameron. So David Cameron, what do we know about David? David is a very, in English parlance, posh. He's from money. He had a very privileged upbringing, not quite as privileged as his aristocratic wife, but still very privileged. This is a multi-millionaire without even starting, and he's been to the best schools, and he's been to the best universities, and from that, he's a very bright guy, but also, by all accounts, and I've met him on a couple of occasions, he's just a nice bloke. He's just got that nice sort of niceness about him. He's sort of like, he'll just come over and shake your hand, and he's just got that, you feel like, although he might not, no, do you know what? I think he would actually enjoy a pint in a pub. He wouldn't have 2. That would push it a bit far, but he'd enjoy that first pint, and he'd have a chat with you and chat about your life, and then it's been really nice to see you. Bye. Really easy, very gentle, nice. And do you know that counts an awful lot in politics? Counts an awful lot. What's the old line about if you can fake sincerity? And he's got that. He's really got that. Now that counts for a lot, but it doesn't count for everything. And quite simply, when he was made leader in 2005, not Prime Minister, leader of the Conservative Party, when they were at a very low ebb after a 3rd election drubbing from Tony Blair, he was made leader, and it was, as Disraeli might have said, a true leap in the dark. People didn't know much about him. He very young, totally inexperienced, had spent a year in TV PR, and then had been a special advisor for a short while. No real experience to speak of, which was slightly more than his shadow chancellor, George Osborne, who hadn't even done the year out. These were the two who were the Conservative Party were just, it was a last roll of the dice. But it worked for them, just. Because even against what we describe as the Great Recession of 2008 to 2010, after 13 years of New Labour rule, with a very lacklustre Prime Minister in Gordon Brown, the Conservative Party could not win a majority. Even with, in our soccer parlance, even with that, he couldn't score with an open goal, And it was just really the fact that he had slightly more seats than the Labour Party, and he was new, and he seized the moment with a couple of if there's 2 things I give you about David Cameron, is that number one, the guy can walk away from car crashes unscathed. He's got that ability. very Blairite in that sort of sense. But also, it's the whole idea that he's good at seizing the moment. When he's one of those who can just recognise, and his career was made because he saw that he could turn the Liberal Democrats into partners. Why turn? Well, because they'd campaigned far to the left of Labour. And so many people, I'm going to calculate 2/3 of the Liberal Democrat vote came from people who didn't like Labour, didn't like New Labour, didn't like the Iraq expedition, and actually wanted stronger public services, and their manifesto actually spoke about an emergency jobs budget. But Cameron saw that actually in their leader, Nick Clegg, there was the potential of turning, and he turned them, and that was his moment. And those 5 years have been marked by several things. First of all, an attempt, the rhetoric, greater than the delivery. The dog is barking louder than its bite, and that is of deficit reduction. The Chancellor, George Osborne, came in and said he was going to get rid of the deficit in one Parliament. Much of where we are at the moment, and we had our annual budget last week, was about George trying to explain away why it's only half done. And why actually 2019 is the year of delivery. We're looking forward to that. That deficit reduction, as I say, although it's only half what he wanted, has divided the country. No question of that. And Labour said that they would do exactly this, actually. Labour said that they would halve the deficit over the next Parliament. So it would have been a similar story. The sharing of the burden is where the great controversy lies. George Osborne for a while had some success in saying that we are all in it together. He's a millionaire as well. And for a while that seemed to hold water, with tax rises across the board, etc., etc. But then about 2 years ago, he reduced the top rate of taxation by 5 pence in the pound, which everyone recognises, and George must even now, kind of undermine that particular rhetoric. And it's never really gone back. But, the road, they've kept the show on the road. Deficit has come down. There haven't been crises of government. But still, will this coalition be seen as a success? I think it'll be seen as a caretaker government in most respects, with very big decisions either being fudged. So, for example, Cameron wanted to take us to war over Syria. And he had a Commons vote, and partly through really poor parliamentary management. So, for example, it was, if I recall, at the end of August. So MPs are on their holidays. They were due to come back on the Monday after a month or whatever, and they got the call that they had to be back on the Thursday before. So if he'd have just waited a few days, if he could, then the MPs could have kept their holidays going. Now this is sort of like the human side of party management. He calls all of his MPs back on the Thursday before. You can imagine that went really down very well in the different families, which were all around the world and around the Mediterranean, simple things like that, just getting these things wrong, making a bad atmosphere. But it meant that he lost the vote, and he came out and said, "I get the message." That was the phrase, which has meant that we haven't been really, we're kind of involved against IS at the moment. I think that the actual stats are we have one bombing raid or actual aircraft sortie a day. So we're involved. I wouldn't say that we're at the top end of involvement, though. That's on foreign policy. Other big things. It's decision time whether we continue to be a nuclear nation or not nuclear weapons. Actually, the decision time was about 4 years ago, but the Liberal Democrats are anti the renewal of the Trident nuclear system. The Conservatives would be very pro. Labour are pro to a point, and what it means is this has been kicked into the long grass. I'll give you a more parochial point. Airports. London, as you know, is booming. The population is rocketing. London was, and maybe still is at this moment right now, the hub of European air transportation and passenger airlines, but we are absolutely beyond capacity now. And so the big decisions have been kicked into the long grass. This is a Conservative issue, really, because they're very strong in the outer suburbs of London, where the airports will be situated, and the locals don't really fancy it. We call them NIMBYs. Not in my backyard. I can see the nodding. And so, what I'm trying to get at is, I don't think that very big decisions have been taken. But the next government will have to take all kinds of big decisions. So, let's talk about this election right now. So, Cameron, I've got a rule of thumb in my brain that most political leaders have between 8 to 10 years of shelf life. It's just the way of things. That we've kind of got that. You have 2-4 years in America. What is it here? Have you got a rule here? Yeah, about the same. Blair was 10 years, and then people were sick of him. Thatcher was 10 years, 11 years. People were sick of her. John Major only did 7, but people were sick of him. Gordon Brown, although he'd done 3 years as Prime Minister, he'd done 10 years as Chancellor and kind of sort of like wannabe Prime Minister. So by the end of 2010, the country was sick of him. I'm going to tell you, I don't think that the UK is sick of David Cameron. I just don't sense it. It's a very divided country at the moment in terms of its politics, but I don't think the country's sick of David Cameron. It's possible that his party is. He's been leader for 10 years. And I think that the jockeying for position to take over is very much underway. We all look forward to Boris Johnson becoming leader, if not Prime Minister. But he's certainly getting ready for the attempt. So where are we on the economy right now? The economy is going okay. We've had our Shadow Chancellor. He does like a dance move at Prime Minister's Question Time when he goes like that. And what he's saying is that the economy has flatlined. That was slightly better move than he does, but anyway. And it's difficult to disagree with him. Where we are right now, just at election time, is that the deficit's coming down, unemployment's coming down, inflation is getting ready to sort of like hit negative. That's a bit tricky, but anyway. Interest rates way down, historically low still. Growth is going up. So just at that moment, the Conservatives have a good story. I don't think that the story goes very, very deep. I'm not sure that the story continues strongly after the election. So much depends on the European economy for the British. We don't like to think of that, but it's true. And so there's a good story there. There's a good story. And what this all leads to is a guy who's becoming sort of like the Rasputin of this election is a guy called Lynton Crosby. Now, Lynton Crosby is known as the Wizard of Oz. Why? Well, he is Australian, and he helped John Howard to 3-4 election victories. And what he is, you can see his fingerprints over everything the Conservatives say, which is very little now. They just use the phrase long-term economic plan. That's used about 300 or 400 times a day, that particular phrase. Cameron is pushed as a nice sort of safe pair of hands. It's a very simple message which is being pushed relentlessly, and it is shoring up the Conservative vote. As one particular commentator put it last week, a Conservative blogger said, I think that in the short term it is absolutely the right thing to be doing. In the medium to long term, it's killing the Conservative Party, because what they haven't got is a view on the future at all. It's all about, safe pair of hands, navigate the economy very, very carefully, and don't do anything radical. To be a true Conservative with a small c. Just keep the show on the road. And that's the message. And what's interesting is that though some, I think it's looking quite ridiculous at the moment, the national press in the UK is mostly Conservative leaning, with one really, the Daily Mirror, that is genuinely Labour. The Guardian is all over the place, as always, and is a protagonist in the big arguments over things like civil liberties. They are not independent, they have a clear view. And what this means is that the Conservative-leaning press have gone early and gone very hard on telling their readers over and over and over again what an idiot and I'll come to it in a moment, what an idiot the leader of the opposition is, and what a decent, upstanding man David Cameron is, and how the economy's flying, and etc., etc. And it's like going back to the days of when Rupert Murdoch was on the warpath in the 1980s, when Margaret Thatcher was fearsome, and the Labour Party were just so out of touch with modern media that they were being just destroyed on a daily basis. What's interesting is that the media are going hard on it, but it's not having an effect on the polls. It's just it's not even having a flicker on the polls. No matter how hard they go, no matter how many mistakes the leader of the opposition makes, no matter how good and statesmanlike the Prime Minister looks, it's not happening. So I think that where we are at the moment is that there's no surprises left to come from the Conservative Party. We're 6 weeks away. The budget was last week. That was your moment. If you were going to do it, if I was them, I'd have taken it on the chin, closed my eyes, held my nose and reduced taxes. No matter how much, and say, oh no, it's all a part of growth. I don't know, I'm making this up. But I think the hard-working people should have taxes lower. That's right. Not like that lot over there. They believe in tax. Just making it up, but reduce it by a penny or something. So that there was a clear, as they put it in British parlance, clear blue water. Right? There's not. They didn't come up with it. There was help for first-time buyers. There was this and that. Great. I just saw it as a damn squib. It wasn't a game changer, and the polls have reflected that over the weekend. The big thing that the Conservative Party was offering was a referendum on Britain's membership of the European Union. And I think that some really interesting things are coming of that. I'll come to UKIP in a moment, which I think is the important point in this particular argument. It doesn't seem to be playing big. I don't know. Maybe it's through the prism of the press, but it just doesn't feel like that's the big issue right now. So the Conservatives, fairly lacklustre with a safe pair of hands as leader. Labour. How to describe their leader, Ed Miliband? I'm gonna give him the worst, kind of sobriquet that I can possibly do. He's basically an academic. That's what he is. This is a man, Cameron's, who's no fool, but he's frightened of Miliband's debating ability. That's why he won't do a head-to-head with him. And Miliband will be good in debate. He's getting better at Prime Minister's questions. He's looking strong. This is a man who, I was saying about people who go out for a pint. I can't imagine him going out for a pint. Just can't imagine. Possibly at a push for the press, maybe a white wine spritzer. But what you would see would be piles of wonkish sort of policy papers. That's what he'd love to be doing. And if somebody in the pub came over and went, "Oh, Mr. Miliband," he'd go, "Oh, you want to talk? We can do that. We can do that." And he would debate data, and he would debate ideas from around the world. He's a wonk. There's no two ways about that. And what that has meant is he's not connected with a wider public. He's talking. He's trying to get into their brains, into their hearts, and I think that he can locate these things, but he can't convey them. He's just not warm in that sense. I think he's getting better at just the right time. But there was a big article in the Sunday Times yesterday where somebody had been speaking to International Rescue, the aid agency in New York, who's run by David Miliband. And David Miliband, the elder brother to the younger Ed Miliband, were both special advisors in the last New Labour government. David was senior advisor to Tony Blair. Ed was senior advisor to Gordon Brown. And David was seen as and I'm putting this all relatively, slightly more normal of the brothers, who can actually, even sort of like convey a bit of warmth, still a bit odd, but brilliant. As you may know, Hillary Clinton said that she had a bit of a crush on him, which did his polling no good at all. But he was Foreign Secretary at the very end of the New Labour government, and it was all expected that he would not only win the leadership election for Labour, but he would win it and continue like a Blairite approach to things. And through the machinery of the voting system of the Labour Party, although he won it in terms of the members and the MPs, he lost it when it came to the trade union block vote, and Ed Miliband won it. And most people would say that, number one, the wrong brother won, but secondly, how can you? What does this say to us that a younger brother stabbed his elder brother in the back? Right. Well, I'd say he looks pretty ruthless to me. When it comes to debate, you debate. Let's just hope that that's all you get from him, right? But I think that it's cast a shadow over all of this, and that's why David Miliband left British politics and went to America and just went, "I'm just getting out." Otherwise, it's just a soap opera. Which will just continue and continue. But the story was this weekend that David, should Ed win, and he wants Ed to win, but should he not win, David will return on the next flight. Anyway, so that was the big story of the weekend. Now, Ed. Ed has been, let me just convey to you just a little bit of how awkward he is. There was great play done that he has trouble eating. That he had a bacon sandwich, and somebody snapped him going like this, and that's the picture that the Conservatives now put out over and over again. Can you see this guy at a state banquet? Kind of thing. Just awkward. He just not. He doesn't care for that sort of side of things. It's the ideas that matter. For him. Perish the thought. But this does make it difficult. And what it means is that the more tabloidy sort of press can go at him. This morning, he's where's Wally? Where is all this sort of? They're trying. Do you know the British cartoon Wallace and Gromit? Yeah. Well, they've got him as Wallace. And actually, there's more than a passing resemblance. That's the difficulty, As you know, the great thing about propaganda is there should be a kernel of truth there, that's doing him no favours. What I will say is they've been doing this for a long while now, and it doesn't, it's for me, talking in my old banking parlance, I think that it's priced in. I think that people have said that actually, that he is what he is, and his polling has not fallen. it's been low all the way through, and it's just edging up a little bit, a little bit. But he's still in with a shout. And as I say, if you take the polling this morning, which is exactly the same over the past 3 months, his nose is just in front. What he's got, without even trying, is two things really. Number one is that the National Health Service is becoming an absolute one of the two battlegrounds along with the economy. Now, I don't know if you were tuning in to the opening sequence, the opening festival of the London Olympic Games. And I think most of us quite enjoyed it. Well, we did back home. But what was interesting was, bearing in mind it was under a Conservative government, was that there was a moment where, if you remember in Danny Boyle's incredible theatre, was where nurses came on. And there was nurses, and the nurses and the patients all came to form the letters NHS. Now, Conservative government, and the Conservatives, the story came out that very gently they went, Danny, do you have to include NHS in your festival? And he went, would you like me to resign, citing political interference? And they went, no, just asking. And what I will say is that and several other examples is equating the National Health Service with British citizenship, with the British Constitution, with what it means to be British. Now, Mrs. Thatcher back in the 1980s had to publicly deny, but we know for a fact she was considering it, taking away state funding of the NHS. What she wanted was national insurance. What is happening is that this is a political battleground, but it's one where the Conservative Party has to use its conference speeches and David Cameron to tell you just how much he loves the NHS. I love it, it's in my heart, don't worry, it's safe with us. But the propaganda from Labour, which is having a great deal of success, is that the NHS is not safe with the Conservative Party. Is that they do it because they know it's a vote winner or not a vote loser. What you don't do is talk about reducing the NHS. But is it really something that they care about? You know, when you look in their eyes, and the answer is no. And so that's becoming a huge vote winner for Labour. I think they're going too far by, in effect, talking about moving some in Labour are, not all. In effect, wanting to move every aspect of the NHS back under a state system rather than a mixed economy of, as Blair would put it, free at the point of delivery, but some of it delivered by private firms. There is some troubling, I would say, as a centrist, troubling rhetoric here, which can cause them a lot of trouble should they win. The other thing that Ed Miliband's got in favour, he just inherited it. I was mentioning the Liberal Democrats just earlier and how they campaigned to the left of Labour in 2010, but then went into government with the Conservative Party. I'm going to tell you about 2/3 of at least half of the Liberal Democrat vote switched to Labour the morning they went into coalition with the Conservatives. And what that has meant is, in my very sort of rough, non-scientific way, is to say that no matter how silly Ed Miliband has acted, no matter what mistakes have happened, his polling has not fallen heavily because he's just got a solid, huge coalition of anti-coalition voters. So no matter what he does, people will vote because they're voting against, you see. So that's Labour at the moment. And as I say, the right-wing press gone very hard on Ed Miliband personally, trying to take him out. They can't, one of the great things that in politics is you go for somebody's financial affairs. Well, he doesn't care for money. Or maybe sexual peccadillos. No, he's too dull for that. And it means that all that they can do him on is image. That's all they can do him on. maybe on policy a bit, but he's pretty confident on where he is on policy. Maybe I'm overdoing that a little bit at the end there. You can always have a go at people on policy. But I think that what's interesting, as I say, is that the polls are not really flickering against him. And in fact, there was a bit of a leak 2 weeks ago where David Cameron loyalists had in Downing Street a Save Dave dinner in the aftermath of Cameron not winning again, but not really losing in a hung parliament. The knives would be out, the wolves would be at the door for Cameron's head from within his own party, and so the loyalists are gathering a Praetorian Guard to try to protect David Cameron. This is not the talk of winners. All right, what we're doing is we are getting ready for a big loss. We're getting ready for a real mess. So the Liberals, what's interesting about the last election is that for one day their leader looked like he'd done really well, and we had Clegg mania for one day. Why? Well, it's partly because he can talk and people hadn't really heard him before. Secondly, this was in this three-way leadership debate between Brown, Cameron and Clegg. Secondly, Labour did a very good job on promoting Clegg's image against Cameron's. And they split the Conservative vote, which ended up in a hung parliament. But actually, the Liberals lost seats at the last election. They were not victorious. They lost seats, and they got about 55 seats at the last election. I think that most people expect them to fall. I think that the average is probably over half to maybe 20 seats. And they only keep those is because they're very strong in some local constituencies. As I said, Nick Clegg may lose his seat, and also, it's just looking like that they're going to be destroyed. And as we were talking earlier about coalition, if this is a referendum on coalition, it's not going to be a winning one. But the Liberals did do something, which is, again, very marked here. There needed to be, for the past 5, 6, 7, 10 years, a boundary review. You know how populations shift, but the constituencies stay the same. So after a while, some constituencies have a vastly smaller population than other constituencies, and so what you do is once in a generation or whatever, you shift them so that they broadly balance. The Conservatives are losing heavily under the current boundaries. Labour are doing very well. It is said, or certainly was said, that the Conservatives had to be between 4 and 7% ahead to get a one-seat majority. Because of how this is done. Now, one of Clegg's prices for being in coalition was he wanted a national referendum on the voting system, from first past the post to some form of proportionality. And the Conservative backbenchers, in effect, blew that out of the water. And Clegg, in retribution, blew out the boundary review. So actually, he may well have cost his Conservative partners, with that one thing, a majority. Very interesting. Now, the thing that equalises this is, it just gets ever more complicated as the weeks go by. One of the safest areas of Britain for Labour, traditionally over the past 100 years, a bit longer. The Labour Party has only been in existence 120 or so years. Scotland. So Scotland used to return solidly 40, 50, 60 seats, 70 seats, 80 seats for Labour. Tories, I'm not sure they even have one there now. Now that, in a normal world, in a normal time, would have delivered, with all this I'm talking about, an election victory for Labour. Well, you might have seen the press that the UK government won the referendum debate, 55-45, but have lost the aftermath massively. and so it means that there is the potential for a Scottish National Party wipeout of Labour's heartland in Scotland. And the big debate over the weekend, apart from, you know, what flight David Miliband will be on, was to what extent will a Scottish National Party back up either the Conservative Party, and they went, no, Labour, and they went, maybe. And so all of the propaganda over the past week is a picture of Alex Salmond, the former leader of the SNP, who's actually standing for Parliament with a little Ed Miliband in his pocket, just there. And then that's being changed all the time, you know, and people are having great fun with that. So the SNP rising heavily. It's going to be interesting if they are. All things being equal, and we're 6 weeks away, they're going to do well. They're going to do very well. And will that mean a second referendum question? Possibly. We will see. I keep mentioning UKIP. For those of you who don't know, the UK Independence Party, starting to be known as Kippers. And the UK Independence Party, average age of about 68, polling extremely heavily, at the moment maybe 17, 18%. Really quite strongly, but very spread across the country. And what that means is that, you know, I don't know anyone who predicts them getting above 10. I think most people think 5 at a maximum. At the moment they've got 2. Why have they got 2? Because these are defectors from the Conservative Party who don't think the Conservative Party are radical enough and are not as vehemently anti-European as they should be. And I'm going to tell you, vehemently anti-European, I think also, you know, and it keeps coming out day after day after day, with regular exposés, that a lot of UKIP in its very heart is anti-multiculturalism. They talk about we don't like Europe, but I'm going to tell you it's anti-multiculturalism. That's where the discomfort comes from that older population. Not all, obviously, but many. They're taking votes, and they can have a very distorting effect on this election by taking a lot of votes. I don't think they'll take a lot of seats. They're taking a lot of votes from the Conservatives. They are taking votes from Labour as well. Disaffected Labour, working class. Sort of constituencies, and so that's going to be a really marked sort of phenomenon. The Greens are on the rise. The Greens are now, on occasions, outpolling the Liberal Democrats, which is not difficult. I imagine we could if we got together. But the Greens already have 1 MP. Will they get another? Possibly. I don't know many people who predict that. But it's the distortion. It's taking 7% away, you know, from, you know, and just meaning that what could be a straight fight, or it just distorts. I haven't mentioned the Irish. Not many seats, but solid. And so the Irish are starting to position themselves that if it was extremely tight, and if the numbers were there that you could have an Irish influence, what is it we get out of it? And these conversations are beginning to go on, and the 2 Protestant parties in Northern Ireland have formed an electoral pact about not fighting against each other, you know, apart from 1 seat, I think it is. So you put this all together, you've got a mess, right? A real mess. But as I said, after May the 8th, the position will be that the parties have several things to face up to. First of all, the economy. The economy, as I say, you know, it's okay. It's moving in the right direction. We are not as dependent upon financial services as we once were just a few years back. There's all kinds of good things happening. One of the unsung stories of Britain at the moment is the car industry. We're net exporters for the first time in about 30 years. And it's not at the low end, it's at the top end. It's the Aston Martins and Jaguars and Land Rovers, high-end tech. We're putting a lot of money into this. We're trying to change our entire education system to be back in science, technology, engineering, and that's a really interesting thing. Internet startups, the capital of Europe by a mile, by an absolute mile. It's the place to be, and the European young know about it. We were out with Jim and Anna last night and talking about how London especially is importing young Europeans and exporting old Brits. That's the kind of flow you want, right? And so from an economic point of view, safety as she goes, and the Labour Party, they've got a unloved, but I think very clever Shadow Chancellor in Ed Balls. Should he become Chancellor, I don't think you'll see wildness there. I think you'll see calm, actually. I think the really big story is Britain's place in the world. I thought it was quite, how can I put this? Like, I'm a right-wing Labour supporter. I'm a centrist, right? So there's a bit of tribal aspect there, and I couldn't help smirking that David Cameron, pushed by, I'm sure, the Wizard of Oz, went over to see Obama in February. Why? Well, it's always nice to go to America. Secondly, he could just burnish those wonderful credentials of statesman-like behaviour, where he could, shake his hands with Obama and look very solemnly about the problems of the world. We've had a wonderful conversation about Iran, Ukraine, about ISIL. It's wonderful. Not only that, but all kinds of development issues in Africa or whatever, And it's that Macmillan-esque and Ike Eisenhower, like the weary tyrants of the world, kind of thing. And what does he get out of it? He gets a picture behind closed doors, which you could only see through a window. And somebody from the Obama camp leaked the phrase that the key thing that Obama had said to Cameron was, "You're letting the Western alliance down on defence spending." And that's become the running issue within the Conservative Party. NATO's aim is for all participants to spend 2%, at least, not to go below 2%. Britain has fallen below 2% on the Conservative watch. We have a great, I'm not sure it'll carry. One of the lines that we've been using for a while is since the Conservatives, and I would say Conservatives, not really coalition. I talk about it being a Conservative government, essentially. It's not quite true, but mostly. And on defence, we talk about how we now have aircraft carriers without the aircraft harriers. So carriers without harriers. Okay? So we've got the boats of an aircraft carrier, we don't have the aircraft. It's absolutely true, until I think 2018, 2020. So you can imagine the Russians are very scared of us at the moment. We'll send our boats over there and just wave, kind of thing. The defence cuts have been huge. And they've been, in effect, behind the scenes kind of things. And it's now back to the bone. It really is. And we're now cutting into the bone. For those of you of a historical bent, the old idea was the great game, wasn't it? The great game of empire and whatever. I think it's fair to say that we can now start debating the fact that Britain is about to give up the great game. We just don't have it. And there's no appetite for it. The army's back. It's tiny. The great debate is over whether we continue with nuclear arms. Ukraine has shown us. I mean, can you imagine this from a British point of view? That Putin was debating with Hollande of France and Merkel of Germany. Well, I'm not sure we even got the call. Bit embarrassing. But actually, I don't think it's done Cameron much damage. I just don't think that there's great appetite for that anymore. Certainly Afghanistan and Iraq has sapped the energy of Britain. Energy and ambition, enthusiasm for being world police people. And I think that that's a huge aspect, especially when you've got a Conservative, and got to understand, Conservatives have always positioned themselves as the party of defence. When the Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond used the phrase, "There's no votes in defence," no votes in defence. And they've been rowing back from that for a while because some of their backbenchers are going, yeah, there is in my constituency, there is. And so there is a low level, not quite civil war, but certainly revolt over defence within the Conservative Party. And the Labour Party just sitting back and just sort of like going, please, be our guests, tear yourselves apart. And this is happening in the run-up to the election. Whatever happens with the next election, there will be more cuts to spending. Obviously, we've always got to remember that these are cuts to an increasing, debt. That continues to rise while you are in deficit, and we are in deficit. What is that meaning for Whitehall? What is it meaning for the civil service? It's certainly a modern era low now. Low in terms of numbers, massively. A third have gone since 2010. Massive amounts. I think that historically that suggests that there may be fewer departments in the future as merging happens. Certainly when we retreated from Empire and Commonwealth, we used to have 7, 8, 9 departments. India Office, Commonwealth Relations Office, Commonwealth Office. We had the Foreign Office, you had the Central African Office, you had all different offices. As they get smaller and smaller, all comes into one. So I think that that's something to really keep an eye on. I think it's very interesting, this whole idea of doing, I'm getting onto the boring stuff now, I do apologise, but it's all necessary. Getting onto the whole idea of doing better with less. I mean, what a lovely phrase that is. And so there is great pressure on government now to deliver a world-class service. That's the phraseology that we use in England, in Britain. World-class services. But what does that actually mean? Well, from words coming out from the Labour Party, they wish to return to that, what my old professor, Lord Hennessy, would describe as the command and control of the Blair years, of power coming from the centre. Now, Labour had a bit of a revolt against that, and it went wrong, and they lost the election in 2010. But it sounds as if that sort of idea is returning, and that Ed Miliband, far from being an anti-Blair character, is actually going to follow a more Blairite model here. Centralisation is what we're talking about. Real pressure on delivery, on implementation, that every pound of taxpayer money needs to be squeezed harder, kind of thing. I think that, for us, geeks on these issues, I think that it's undeniable that there will be a continued moderate politicisation of the centre. Britain has historically been a place where we believed in a kind of theoretical, apolitical civil service, but at that very top level, thin. I say thin and few in number, but powerful in position. You're going to see more politicisation at that very top. But overall, I'm going to tell you that for all of the mess of the election, for all of the anger in debate, for all of the difficulties that we've got in front of us, maybe I'm being a bit too optimistic here, but I just don't think Britain's in danger at the moment. You've heard the old phrase about, like cometh the hour, cometh the man, woman. I say woman because Margaret Thatcher was absolutely that person in 1979. I think that you get the politicians you need and the politicians you deserve at any particular moment, and I just don't see that that there is great necessity or fear or concern. I mean, people, are up against it, but people are always up against it. I think Labour come in. I think that they will put money into the NHS, but they can't do a great deal more. I think that the Conservatives will put money into the NHS, maybe slightly less than Labour, but still huge amounts. I think when it comes to the great game, I think that Labour and Conservatives are absolutely on the same page, really, because it's reflecting the British culture, really. and overall, you know, there'll always be an England. It might not be with Scotland, but there'll always be an England. Thank you very much. Any questions?
If there's a minority,
excuse me, sir.
Yeah, if there's a minority government, will a coalition be formed again, or is a coalition completely out now in British politics? I say this because there's debate now in Canada at our upcoming elections about the prospects for a coalition, which has not been tried in Canada, if the Conservatives were to get a minority here in Canada, or the other parties had a minority as well.
I think the morning after an election changes a lot of things. Was it Clausewitz who said no plan survives first contact with the enemy? And I think that it's a bit like that when it comes to elections. We can talk about this all day long, and I do, and you get no closer. There's a great story here. In the run-up to the 2010 election, the British Civil Service, the Rolls-Royce Civil Service, did their war gaming of what could possibly happen. And not one of them, under any circumstance, thought that Nick Clegg would do a 180 and go into coalition, right? Not one of them. Nobody saw it, right? So the point being that, you know, anything's possible. If the numbers demand it, you know, where there's a will, there's a way. There's no doubts that the Conservative backbenchers, those not enjoying office, and, you know, let's not beat around the bush, you know, not enjoying the car, not enjoying the jump in salary, not enjoying the department and the civil service, you know, the flunkies all around, those not enjoying that have hated this coalition. In Parliament, I remember one of them, I think it was Nadine Dorries, standing up, and actually this word's not been heard in years, just, you know, it alliterated, which was the lick-spittle Liberals. I thought that was lovely. So there is a great deal of antagonism over coalition. Who knows what the numbers will bring up? I think that a lot of people are planning and wargaming a lot wider now for minority government. We had a minority government for 8-9 months in 1974, where there was a minority government, which was then followed by a second election, which was narrowly won. The civil service, we've winkled this out, and the phrase, and I used it earlier, is strong, stable government. Strong, stable government. Now, what does that mean? It means whatever you want, but it means that there is a feeling within the governing circles, and that was very prevalent in 2010, maybe less so now, that big decisions on the economy were required, and required quickly and robustly, which I think led to an aura that that nobody really fancied minority government. So we had our coalition, and as I hope I've illustrated, it's survived longer than we thought. But, you know, and there haven't been the crises, or will it fall? I don't think once there's been that sort of idea. Not once, as far as I can remember, which is quite remarkable, actually. But at the same time, there's a lot of bruised egos. There's a lot of feeling that it didn't have a proper mandate because of that 180 from Clegg, which I would subscribe to, actually. And that, actually, I think that the feeling is that coalition is unwanted, but, you know, you have to take what you get, don't you?
Thank you very much for a very entertaining tour d'horizon. From the way you describe the current mood and the kinds of issues in the campaign, I would expect except in Scotland, a very, very low turnout. I wondered what the turnout was in 2010 and what your prediction was. We'll email you in a few weeks. And
2005 was, no, 2001 was extremely low. It went down to 59%, lowest in the modern era. I think it went up to 65 in 2005, and maybe late 60s. I'd gamble on that, about 68 in 2010. I just don't know. You can see that there is a great deal of debate around, huge debate, and a lot of people who feel disenfranchised. And the people who feel disenfranchised often disenfranchise themselves by not voting, right? So while the Conservative Party, if they are making moves, it's to shore up their older vote, and they're doing that by all kinds of savings wheezes, increasing, the amount you can put into tax-free savings and things like that, which is shoring up their older vote at the expense of the younger vote. So at the margins, the Labour leader has announced that he will reduce tuition fees. So they were 3,000 in 2010. They were trebled to 9,000. He will bring them down to 6,000, and he'll do that by taking some kind of tax relief off of pensions. So he's saying the older vote's gone, right? They're not going to vote for us, so we will take the money away from the older types. Now, will that help the younger vote? Don't know. Absolutely don't know. I think that Nick Clegg personally may suffer from that younger vote, just for interest. Nick Clegg, not only in the run-up to 2010, said that there would be an emergency jobs budget to try to get people back into work. He also signed a pledge on camera saying, we will abolish tuition fees. And he went into government just a few weeks later and said, actually, I think we're going to have to treble them. And there was a student, I mean, you can't call it a riot. I mean, it's just not a riot worth its name. Come on. Right, a few police horses were out, but and lots of statues of Thatcher were attacked and whatever. A real riot. But in his constituency, Nick Clegg's own personal constituency is a student, it's a university constituency. So it's entirely possible that he will suffer from it. But I think my guess would be, on turnout, that I think it will be on the higher side rather than the lower side. I think for all of the, there's a lot of smoke and fury. There's a lot of absolute blind disgust with cuts and Tories and whatever from and also I mentioned earlier about divided country. There's a divided geographical country too, not just the Scotland issue, but the north of England and Wales. It's entirely possible that this will be one of the most geographically divided elections, where in the north and Wales and southwest, maybe certainly north and Wales, it'll be Labour. The centre of London will be Labour, heavily Labour, and the outside of London and the general southeast and south will be Conservative, and you'll see very few exceptions to the rule, which again is that's a problem. That's a real problem. But again, the Conservative Party, Mrs. Thatcher, I don't know if you know this, she had what was known as the poll tax, the community charge, local taxation, and it was going to be tough and be difficult. She knew it was going to be unpopular in all kinds of ways, so she tried it out on Scotland first. This current Conservative Party Actually, all that they've spoken about in recent weeks, along with the long-term economic plan, what they also spoke about was the Northern Powerhouse, and this idea of trying to help the North. So it's not as if they're just abandoning these things. You know, even I was explaining, the National Health Service, the Conservative Party is actually assuaging this, is trying hard to neutralise. It might not be the thing that they believe most in the world, but they're trying hard to neutralise it. So yeah, I think that turnout will be, you know, do you want me to call a number? Is that what you're asking me? Yeah. All right, okay. I'm going to go at 70. There you go.
Thanks. Just on Wales, you just brought them up now.
Where's it you're from?
From England, actually, funnily enough.
Yeah, where?
Oxford. Yeah, not too... Was that a shake of the hand?
No. I understand. I know my enemy now. You carry on.
Now. Yeah, just on Wales, I was wondering whether there has been a rise in the Plaid Cymru party, or because you just mentioned that Labour would probably take Wales.
Yeah.
Is that looking likely? Okay.
See, what was interesting, I mean, I think it's a part of this. In the days after the lost Scottish referendum vote, Wales had a poll that showed that independence had fallen to 3%, a belief in wanting independence for Wales. 3%. Right?
That's what I wanted to follow up on, to find out if that was a movement that then was growing and, okay.
I mean, 3% is within the margin of error, so it could be 0. Right? You know, Wales, you know, it's I mean, I've got lots of very close, very, how can I put this, very proud Welsh people around me, and none of them are pro-independence. Part of them, maybe it shows that they've left Wales for London, I don't know, but anyway. They do. I do see on occasions great nationalism there when Wales play England at rugby. Yeah. Right. Apart from that, I see none.
Really? Okay.
The north of Wales and the countryside of Wales, which is, as we know, how many people in Wales? 3 million. And 1.5 million, 2 million, I don't know, are in that sort of like that southern belt. The south of Wales, Swansea, Neath and Cardiff sort of areas. So the relatively unpopulated areas of Wales are the most nationalistic. But even there, you know, I think that Welsh nationalism has been stronger in the past. I think that the Welsh Assembly has really, you know, although you will always find people who want independence, of course you will. I think that the Welsh Assembly, I think they're quite pleased with that, actually, the Welsh. I'm just talking as an outsider.
Yeah, sure.
And I wouldn't want to debate this with any Welsh people, but I think that, you know, they're relatively happy with where they are in terms of their constitutional arrangements. I think that it is quite strongly Labour, and these sort of areas will, I'm sure, see quite strong turnout, actually. Any other follow-up points there? No.
That's fine. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for both the substantive and entertaining presentation. You've mentioned Constitution once more. And there's a Department of the Constitution in the UK. I've met some of the people that one day, but you don't have a constitution. So I'm trying to rationalize. If you want to eliminate a department and save a lot of money, that's one place you could start. Maybe I'm being facetious here, but could you explain to me what, when people refer to the Constitution, what it is they're referring to, so that I appreciate that? I'm
going to tell you that I'm not sure that I know of that department. I know that there was. I believe you. I'm reproaching myself for not knowing this department. It's something that just doesn't seem to, you know, resonate with the sort of work I do, the people that I'm speaking to, and I think that that's all part of. You know, it's the prelude to the answer to this question. So this was the Nick Clegg stuff, wasn't it? Was that his department? Was that his like mini fiefdom? Yeah. No. Look, we don't know. We don't know. Clegg was very interested in the Constitution when he first got in, because he wanted to change the electoral system. He wanted to, he was the white knight on these issues, something that the Liberals had believed in forever, that New Labour under Blair had shot the fox by changing the House of Lords and reforming it substantively, but not entirely. They had a real sort of look at electoral reform, Labour did, etc., etc. And Nick Clegg thought he was going to finish this off, that he was going to be the man that brought complete electoral reform to the House of Lords, that he was going to bring in proportional representation, and a whole raft of other things. And he's delivered nothing on these things, which is quite a lamentable record on these issues which he believed in most. British Constitution. Well, how long have we got? Let's have a look. I was taught, when I was first taught, and I think it's pretty true now, that the British Constitution, let me try and remember, was found in 4 places. One was statute law, of course. Secondly, was in tradition. It's coming back to me. Excellent. I started on that road without knowing the end, but I know. So tradition and convention. Thirdly, works of authority, the books that matter over the past 150 years. Bagehot, Dicey, even my own Lord Hennessy's books. And fourthly, in judicial review. Now you put that all together, you've got the rules and the ways that we live by. Well, that's why we call it the British Constitution, often in inverted commas, sometimes with a small c, right? But what you have seen over the past, let's say 25 years since the Major era, is a codification of lots of the ideas and the traditions and the conventions, which is in effect leading towards what's near as, damn it, a written constitution. So, for example, what was once known as questions of procedure for ministers, now known as the Ministerial Code. I think it might have even changed the name since then. It used to be a classified document. It's now published. The Civil Service Code, that's been published. MI5, MI6, GCHQ are now avowed. Until the early 1990s, people would go, "What's that building there?" And people would go, "No building there." Don't know what you're doing. And so gradually there is a codification. What's interesting is that Gordon Brown, after 10 years, and forgive me this because it's one of the things I'm writing about at the moment. You would have thought, wouldn't you, that after 10 years, what would be the place to look at a British Prime Minister and observe their ideas, what they're about, what to avoid? You would have thought that from the Prime Minister in number 10, number 11's a pretty good vantage point over a decade. You would have thought so, wouldn't you, right? And the great thing about Gordon, of which I've got no antagonism towards Gordon. I think that the thing about Gordon was that he was just so hell-bent on becoming Prime Minister, that what it meant was that he didn't put enough effort into actually thinking about what being Prime Minister actually meant. It was all about getting there. But the first thing, after 10 years of, from his point of view, a largely sort of like hated Blairism. I mean, he believed in most of it, just didn't believe in the guy who was doing it a lot of the time. The thing that he came up with was not like, we're going to reform the NHS. Oh, we're going to get rid of Trident. He came up with what was known as a green paper, a discussion paper on the governance of Britain. Right? And everyone went, okay, all right, okay. After 10 years, this must have been well thought through, right? And it wasn't. Parts of it were enacted in the very last days of the previous Parliament, and what we call the wash-up, where you just sort of like agree with the Conservative opposition. Okay, we've got a whole load of stuff coming through. Is there stuff we can agree on here? They went, how about civil, here we go, the actual Civil Service Act. There was never an act before, right? And that was just, can you agree? Can we agree? Okay, we agree, that's done. After 150 years of trying to push this through, it was done in about 10 seconds, right? But the great thing that Gordon put in the Governance of Britain Green Paper was we should have a conversation about a written constitution. And what's really interesting is that some of the guardians of the constitution, the senior civil servants, immediately started to look and go, really? That might be slightly more difficult than the way it sounds. No one's ever actually had a 4, 5, 6,000-year-old country with all kinds of weirdnesses. I mean, somebody once had a back-of-the-envelope attempt to actually say, if we became a republic, how much parliamentary time would it take to take the Queen out of the governance of Britain? They went, probably every day of Parliament for maybe 5 years. And so you go, oh, okay, so we're just going to suspend Britain for half a decade so that we can get the Queen out of the debate. Now, as you know, where there's a will, there's a way. If you want to do these things, you can do them. And it probably wouldn't be 5 years and that's scaremongering and whatever. But it's the kind of idea that, you know, when you've got an organic constitution, that's the way I would describe it. I wouldn't even describe it I describe it as an organic, uncodified constitution, which is gradually becoming codified. But there are bits of it which still are way beyond the power of a code. You know, the way that, you know, that senior civil service, you know, we've done all kinds of projects on people like the men of secrets, the cabinet secretaries, of which they are public figures but trained in saying nothing. You know, these are the kind of people that we like to focus on, and not to actually try to sort of like, you know, like poke them and say, come on, tell us your secrets. It's to actually sort of go, so what is it you do? Who is it that puts you in here? How did you get here? And they're the simplest questions, some of the most difficult to answer. So yeah, do we have a British constitution? To your eyes, no. To our eyes, very much so.
And we don't want to change it.
Oh, mate, I'm relaxed. I'm relaxed on these things. I really am. You know. There's so many people who want secrets. Well, I think there's plenty of secrets that are. You know, what's the old line about? If you want to keep something secret, publish it. Right? You know, put it in a great big document about that big. Right? Put it somewhere in the middle or somewhere towards the end or something. Right? So do I want to change it? Not particularly. I don't particularly burn with it.
So John, we're getting to the end of this, but maybe I'll squeeze in a question. If you could talk a bit about what would happen to the idea of a referendum on the EU if the Tories do manage to stay in. I presume if it's a minority, it's over. But you know, now that maybe the most anti-EU group of the Tories have left for UKIP, I mean, how does that change the scenario here?
Oh, it's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So, those of you who might not know, the Conservative Party have political promise, that there will be a referendum, should they be in their power, in 2017. Cameron, in recent months, has floated the idea of bringing that forward to 2016, should they win. The Conservative Party backbenchers, the waves of them in 05 and 10 have been quite, in their gut, anti-European, quite vociferously anti-European. Now, what's weird, it's one of the weirdnesses of our coalition, is that the Liberal Democrats are probably the most pro-European party. And so what we've had is a Deputy Prime Minister propping up a very pro-European. He was a European Union special advisor where he met his Spanish wife. I mean, this is a very pro-European man propping up a viscerally anti-European party. Very strange. Now, let me add more madnesses in here. The Conservative Party, traditionally seen as the party of business, but they're anti-European, whereas just about every business, every big business, and especially the finance of London, which is vast, are behind their backs going, the risk of us leaving Europe is huge. It will cost us. It will cost us so much. But we can't shout this out, certainly not in an election period. So you've got a Conservative Party traditionally pro-business who are anti-European on the surface. You've got a Labour Party traditionally anti-business, and this current one, there's been all kinds of debates over are they anti-business? Maybe at the top. Some of the rhetoric is vehemently pro-European. Okay, all right. You've got UKIP. We would just pull us out immediately. As soon, if we can do it, pull us out immediately. Now, I think that something very intriguing is going on in the Conservative Party. Certainly, in my fairly sort of, I'm going to call it like amateur, sort of like just having a chat with people, senior people, and just taking the temperature. And I think that you correctly pointed out the defection of some of the louder, more uncompromising Conservatives, anti-European ones, those who have defected to the UK Independence Party, I think has taken some of the heat out of the debate. What I think is happening is that there is a realisation, the rhetoric of the Conservative Party of Cameron and Osborne is, we want reform in Europe. If we get reform, we will campaign to stay. Now that's very different to we're out. We want out. And so something happened in 1975. So Britain joined the European Union in 72, actually formally in 73. And it was taken in by a parliamentary vote. There was no referendum. But in 1974, the Labour Party came in, was riven by disagreement over Europe, and they pledged the first referendum. And the wily Harold Wilson, Prime Minister, talking, as he would say, an opposition's job is to oppose. So he'd been very pro-European. When he was out of power, he became very anti-European. And when he got back to number 10 in 1974, pledging a referendum, the rhetoric changed. So what began to happen was he would say, if there is a change in the terms, then maybe we'll stay. And the great debate has been that there were some cosmetic changes. And then Harold Wilson came out and went, I told you I was looking for change. We've got change. I now campaign for a pro vote. And it looks at the moment as if history might be repeating itself. Cameron this week, he compared himself to Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. He said, I'm slightly taller than Tom. He said, but I share the same belief in trying to achieve my goal. And the goal is to change some of the European treaties, which Angela Merkel, who actually is really interesting, the Tories' hope is that the Germans are going to come to their aid. And that what the Conservative Party, and dare I say it, a lot of Britain, if not all, if not most, what Britain would like is a pro-business reform to Europe. The Germans would like that too. And so the hope is that where we are prepared to upset people, maybe the French, the Germans will be able to sort of like keep the peace and say, look, Britain, you're acting very silly over this. But we don't want to see you go. Can we meet you halfway? Can we meet you a third of the way? Right? Can then be presented as a true victory for British common sense. So what we might have is an example, is a position where we would have spent maybe 8 years debating first the idea of Scottish independence and then European membership. Great trauma, great controversy to end up exactly where we started.